Hi guys, welcome to my top 50 horror films tier list. I'm making this based off the review websites, what they've given me, plus a lot of horror films that I've seen myself. I'm sure most people will not agree with this list, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the placement of all of these as I go along. Leave your thoughts down in the comments. To get straight into it, we're going to do Alien first. So I'm going to put this in C tier. The reason being is even though it's an incredibly iconic film and very popular and very highly rated, personally, I just don't find it that scary. And, maybe I'm just comparing it to modern day horror films as well. But just for the record, everything on this list I believe is well worth watching and you should look into if you haven't already seen it. So yeah, starting off with Alien at C. Get Out is next. I'm gonna put this at an E personally. I think it is a bit overhyped, honestly, and even though I thought it was well made, I thought the story was maybe a little bit overly complicated, and it wasn't scary to me at all. I know a lot of people liked it though, so I'm probably gonna get some flack in the comments for that one. Moving along to Hereditary. Hereditary, I'm putting in E again. So it's quite a long horror film, and I like films that are long in general. My only problem with Hereditary is that for like the first 2 hours, not too much happens, and it doesn't feel like a horror film to me. It feels more like a drama, and it's fairly slow. However, the reason it's still E and not F is because I believe the last 30 minutes or so really saves it. There's a lot of really good scary scenes at the final stage of the film, so that's why I'm putting it in E. Moving along to we got Halloween. Halloween, I'm going to put in C category. Again, same as Alien, an older film. It came out in 1978, and it's an iconic film. It's probably the foundation for a lot of horror films on this list, which followed it. However, I don't personally find it that scary, and compared to some of the other ones on the list, I wouldn't have it any higher than that for me. Even though I understand it's a classic and again very highly rated. Moving on to It. Now, for me, It is a straight F. Like, I'm just not like a massive fan of that film. I think the clown's voice is pretty jarring, and I don't find it very scary at all. I know it's based off a popular Stephen King book, and again, it's quite a popular one in the mainstream. But for me, it doesn't hold a candle to any of the other ones on this list personally. Um, Now, on to the next one. We're going to be looking at Insidious. Personally, I'm probably going to put this in D tier. Now, while it is a good film and there are a lot of scary scenes in it, I don't think it's as memorable as some of the ones that I'll be coming up. I think it's a really good example of like a more modern day horror film, though, and it's still definitely worth watching. Again, there are a lot of really scary scenes in it. Let me know what you think on that one. The next one on the list is going to be Sinister. For me, I would put this in an E, in E tier. The reason for that is because it's a very interesting premise for a film, and it is enjoyable, but I don't think it's massively scary, and it's not that well remembered, not as highly rated as some of the others on this list, and it wouldn't be in my top 10 personally, and it wouldn't be one that I would rant and rave about or recommend to a lot of people, but it's definitely worth a watch like all the others on this list. Moving on, so we've got The Conjuring. Now, The Conjuring, I'm going to put this S tier personally. I think this is a modern day classic, even though it came out like just over 10 years ago now. I think personally, The Conjuring is an excellent example of essentially a haunted house film, which is one of the more classic genres in the horror film. I think everything from the acting to the writing to the story and even the actual fear and horror and tension, I believe like it's genuinely like one of the better examples of a horror film that's come out in the past 20 years. And I know that's highly rated as well, so maybe a lot of people would agree with me on that one. I'm not sure. Okay, so moving on, possibly one of the more controversial ones on the list. I've got The Exorcist. Now, I'm actually going to put this in C tier. One of the reasons I'm putting this in C tier is I am just sick to death of seeing it on all of these review websites as the greatest horror film that's ever existed and that will ever exist. I know it's a classic and I know it came out like 50 years ago, but again, I'm comparing it to modern day horror films as well. If you ask me when it first came out, if it was even alive then, which it wasn't, I'm sure it'd be rated a lot higher. But as I said, I'm really into scary films, and whenever I'm trying to find new ones and I'm looking on these review websites, it's very common to see it at the top of the list, if not near the top. And we're in 2026 right now, and personally for me, you can't be putting The Exorcist at the top of a list of horror films, in 2026. I'm sure a lot of people have seen that. I'm sure there's a lot of fans of it 'cause it is incredibly highly rated as well. Let me know what you think on that one. Moving on, then we're going to be going to The Shining next. Now, for me, this is S tier. While it isn't, it's to me it feels a lot more like a thriller than a straight horror film. However, I feel like the genres have kind of like changed over the years, and these genres tend to merge together, and the line is pretty thin anyway. Obviously, a classic film. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with the positioning of The Shining on this list. Excellent film, incredibly highly rated, super creepy, well worth the watch, very atmospheric. I love the setting, and generally, I just really like films that are in like a snowy setting because they're quite uncommon. And for me, it's very memorable. It's an iconic film, and it just deserves to be in the S tier. And okay, so moving on then to The Thing. Now, The Thing for me, I'm gonna put in B tier. Now, the reason it's in B tier for me, it's an excellent film, okay, but just like a couple of the others, it came out in the early 80s, and when you're comparing it to modern day horror films, I'm not sure it stands up in terms of fear factor and certain other things. It's an excellent film, right? And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of shit for this in the comments, but personally, I wouldn't say it was like it's an iconic horror film, but yeah, if I was recommending a horror film to someone in 2026, I'm not sure I would necessarily say The Thing personally, even though it's a great film. Yeah, let me know what you think on that one. I know it's going to be a bit controversial in the comments. Hopefully, anyway. Hopefully, you get a lot of comments. Moving on then to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, again, I'm going to put this in the C tier, and I feel like on this list already so far, I think we've got a lot of classic horror films in this category, in C particularly. Now, again, the reason for that is because it's 2026, and when you're comparing these films to modern day horror films, I'm not sure it stands up as well in terms of quality, watchability, what some what somebody would want to watch if he was just getting into horror films today. However, just like the predecessors in this category, I think it's clearly an iconic film. It's a classic. It's always high on the list of these film review websites, and I'm sure a lot of people who are a little bit older than myself remember seeing it when they were younger, and it stands in the memory of a lot of people. Um, Great film, and a lot of films have tried to replicate it over the years in various ways. A lot of the ones on this list later down the line we'll get onto, I've tried to do similar concepts of films in terms of someone, essentially like those chase films when you have a bad guy chasing people down. A lot of the films in the C tier are like setting the foundations for ones later on in the list. Let me know what you think about that one. I think that one's going to be a little bit more controversial as well, to be honest. Um, okay, moving on to the next one on the list, we've got The Ring. Now, personally for me, The Ring is in the A category. I don't think it's quite top tier and high enough that deserves it to be in the S class. However, I think for a fairly modern day film that only came out about 24 years ago now, I think it's super creepy. I think it's scary. I like the story. And, you know, fear is subjective, right? Fear is, it's hard to define. And, I try to put myself in the positions of the characters in these types of films and think, like, how would I handle it? And I would be shitting myself if I was one of the main characters in The Ring. Watching the videotapes and then having like basically a terminal death sentence afterwards, like incredibly scary and creepy and thought provoking. And it's one of those horror films for me that really sticks in your memory, like even a couple of weeks after you've watched it. So A tier for me. I'm not sure if people will agree with that, but I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts. Okay, so what have we got next then? We've got Silence of the Lambs. Okay, now Silence of the Lambs, personally, is one of my favorite all time films in general. And in terms of my favorite all time films, it would probably be S tier, right? But again, it's just like some of the ones in the C category. While it's a classic, while it's highly rated, I just think for me, it's not scary enough to warrant it being any higher in this list. It's similar to the film Seven for me. It feels almost like a crime thriller than it does like a straight horror film. So for the sake of the video in this list, I can't really justify having it much higher than B tier, even though it's an incredible film and I really enjoy it. So next film on the list, we've got Jaws. So I'm gonna put this in. You probably already guessed it. I'm gonna put this in C class, right? Similarly to the Silence of the Lambs, I just don't really see this as much of a horror film personally, right? And I know it is technically a horror film. Personally, it doesn't scare me that much. However, after watching it, if you try and go swimming, especially in the sea, you will have a bad time. And this film is all you will be thinking about. Well worth a watch, absolute classic, iconic film. And as I've said before, like the start of this video, every film that I'm going through, I believe to be well worth a watch. I really like all of these films. So, don't be offended that it's in the C category like some of the other classics. I just don't really see it as like a straight horror film that deserves to be much higher on this list. And obviously, it's quite old now as well. It's about 50 years old. So, do you want to watch a 50-year-old? Do most people want to watch a 50-year-old, barely horror film if they're trying to get into the horror genre? I'm not sure. But yeah, on to the next one. So, can't lie, I know this isn't massively highly rated by a lot of people, especially the film review websites, right? And I think a lot of these are very personal to me and very circumstantial. So, controversially, probably, I'm actually going to put this in S tier. I think The Strangers is one of the purest forms of like horror films out there, and I believe it to be terrifying. Honestly, like I've seen it probably a dozen times at this point, and it scares me just as much every time I watch it as the first time I watched it. The thought of being in a house all alone and being so vulnerable, and the tension in this film is excellent. A lot of really scary scenes, and it's one of them films that gets your blood pumping. If you're looking to see like just the standard, like classic type of horror film, one that's more modern as well, only coming out like 15 years ago or so, I would definitely say this is up there in terms of horror films. I'm sure a lot of people won't agree with that, but that's perfectly fine. This is my list. Okay. moving on then, I would put this in the exact same category as Strangers, S tier. The Hills Have Eyes. I remember the first time I watched this film, I was at a sleepover with some of my friends when I was in secondary school, and we was with a bunch of guys, and yeah, everyone found it terrifying. I've seen it probably half a dozen times since. I think it's one of the creepiest films out there. Like, and I think it's incredibly well made. It's a really interesting topic, and I know it's not highly rated like that, but I think I just have a soft spot for these horror films, which are pretty gory and made in the early 2000s. I love The Hills Have Eyes, and I think it's definitely worth watching if you want to see something that will shit you up. It's basically, if you haven't seen it, it's about a family who is taking a road trip, I think through Nevada potentially, where they used to do like atomic bomb testing in the military, and because of that, um, there's a lot of people who didn't move out in the area. I think the miners, and they basically mutated over time, and basically become like feral, violent creatures, and it's just like a classic fight for survival. And I just think it's excellent. I can watch this every week for the rest of my life, and I will enjoy it just as much each time. Let me know if there's any other fans of that one. I'd be really interested to see if I'm like a unique case here or if other people enjoy it just as much. So moving on again. Now I never see this one on lists anywhere, right? I never see The Fourth Kind on any types of like highly rated horror films lists. I heard about this on a podcast, Painkiller, already, like about 15 years ago or something like that. I checked it out, and still to this day, I find it to be terrifying. It's made in an interesting style as well. It's a lot of like recorded footage of like interviews, and without trying to spoil these films too much, basically it's related to aliens, and in these therapy sessions where they record interviews, they start having flashbacks while they like being hypnotized, and during these flashbacks they start to remember things that they'd forgotten, and it's incredibly scary, and it's maybe more so than any other film on this list. I think it's one that will have you, closing your curtains, checking under the bed, double checking the doors locked at night before you go to sleep after watching it. I think it's truly terrifying and well deserving to be in the S tier of horror films. One of the scariest films I've ever seen. So I would definitely highly recommend that one, and encourage people to check it out. Okay, moving on to the next one then. Now, controversial, just like a lot of ones in this list. This is the Terrifier 2. Not the Terrifier 1, not the Terrifier 3, it's the Terrifier 2. And just like a lot of the films in this list, they are part of larger sequels with multiple different films. And I'm just trying to be selective here instead of having otherwise my list would go from 50 films to 150 films. The Terrifier 2 is it's hard to watch for a lot of people. It was hard to watch for me at first, and I haven't seen it as much as some of the other films I mentioned. However, like in terms of like a gory horror film, like what you would kind of expect from a horror film in terms of like shocking scenes, fear, concern for the characters on screen, and just like straight up brutality, it's right up there for me, and that's why I've got it in the A tier. The only reason it might not be in the S tier is because I don't think the story or the writing is necessarily strong enough. But I think it's a modern classic in terms of slasher, gory horror films. Let me know what you think on that one. So next on the list is Signs. Can't lie, this might be my favorite film of all time. And I know I'm kind of breaking my own rule here in the sense that I've got it in S tier when it's barely even a horror film. I'd say it's more of a thriller, to be honest. However, a lot of people do have it in that category. And I would say, even though it's not blatantly a horror film, like The Fourth Kind, like The Hills of Eyes, like The Strangers, like The Terrifier, or The Ring, or The Conjuring, I would say it's got some incredibly tense scenes in it that are more thought provoking and make me more concerned for the characters and generally more scared than a lot of horror films that I've watched, and I've seen quite a lot. It's got an excellent story as well. The writing's excellent. I know a lot of people shit on it because the concept, like the ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but a lot of people think the ending's a bit silly. Me personally, I don't. It's one of my favorite all-time films. I saw it for the first time when I was about maybe 10 or something like that. And I remember walking past the TV when my dad was watching it, and it was probably like halfway through. It was the scene where the alien has got his hands on the other side of the door, and Mel Gibson is shining the reflection of a knife to see what's on the other side. And I was walking past the TV when this was on, and I was locked in. I had to sit down and finish the film. Then I bought it on DVD. Then I bought it on Amazon Prime years later, and it's one that I've showed so many people, and I enjoy so much. I realize that is going to be a controversial one, though, but again, it's personal preference. Um, Another controversial one. I don't know if I've got like, if there's something wrong with me, but I feel like I enjoy a lot of types of films that other people may not, because there's a lot of like not very highly rated films in my high up on my tier of opinions here. But House of Wax, okay, it's got to be A tier for me. I love these films that came out in the early 2000s. I realize it's not the highest quality of film. I just love the film where I love the style of horror films where it's like a group of like people in the early 20s in a scenario, and they kind of being chased, and then they just have to run away from the bad guy or whatever, like the entire film. I think there's a lot of great suspense. I think it's really unique, or it's got a unique spin in it anyway, in terms of like, the House of Wax. And just like a couple of others, that I've mentioned before, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think a lot of films like the House of Wax have kind of taken inspiration from earlier films that came out a long time ago and put a modern day spin on it. I really enjoy it. I understand it's a bit of a dumb film, but it is what it is. It's A tier for me. You know, it is what it is. Now, next up on the list, we've got Creep. Now, again, A tier. Creep is A tier for me. Very simple, very unique. I find the found footage horror films to be incredibly engaging, personally, and I love the way you kind of see the horror film from like a first person point of view. I think there are a couple of others similarly to this later on the list, which we'll get onto soon. I think it's a really cool film, super simple, and while it's not as like obviously like scary as other ones on the list that I mentioned, it's very subtle, and it just makes me think, oh my god, what would I do in that situation? And it's very realistic in that sense as well, because it's not like massively over the top. It's very like believable as a concept for a horror film. The idea of like someone meeting someone on like Reddit or whatever, to go and meet them and film like a documentary for them, and then the guy that they end up meeting turning out to be an absolute weirdo. I think it's a great example of a horror film, and it proves that you don't need a massive budget to make a really good film as well. So, A tier for me, 100% all day long. Okay, moving on. What have we got next? We've got Paranormal Activity. Right, so for me, this is straight up B tier, right? I can explain, promise. Right, B tier. Has to be B tier for me. The reason for this is again, I watched it with friends late at night. I was sleeping in my friend's living room or just before we slept, and there was a few of us. We were stealing our his parents' alcohol, and we watched a few horror films, right, as I used to do when I was younger. This was one of the scary. It might have been the scariest film I'd ever seen at that stage in my life, right? And the only reason it's not higher on the list is because obviously it's an incredibly slow film, and it relies a lot on not knowing necessarily what happens. So in terms of rewatchability, I think it falls a little bit short because a lot of the things that make this film shine are, the surprise, not knowing what's happening, and especially if you're new to the horror film genre, I just believe that this film is terrifying, and just like the Fourth Kind, which I mentioned earlier, and Strangers, it's one of those horror films that just sticks in your memory. You'll be scared to go to the toilet or scared to take the bin out at night if you're not used to watching horror films and you see this for the first time. It will really stick with you and disturb you, and it's a modern day classic as well. If you haven't seen it, if you're new to horror films, definitely worth a watch. But moving on, we got Battle Royale next, right? This is going in C tier for me, right? The reason it's C tier for me is because just like a couple of the others I've mentioned, I don't really consider it massively a horror film, even though it is labeled in this genre. I just think it's more of like a thriller, drama, almost action film. However, super unique. Came out before the Hunger Games. Personally, for me, I think it's a better version of the Hunger Games, and it's the OG as well. I think there's some really tense scenes in it. A lot of people aren't keen on watching horror films or just films in general that have subtitles, but I just think it's a really interesting concept for a film. To have like a classroom of like school kids, I guess, being put in a scenario where they have to fight for survival. I think it's super unique. It's not massively scary, but I think it's very enjoyable and entertaining. And if you haven't seen it, check it out. Okay, what have we got next then? We've got The Witch. Okay, so The Witch for me, it's going in E tier, right? And I don't want to talk too badly of it. I think it's an excellent film. I love that like old timey dialogue. I love the setting. I love the story. I think the goat's probably like the scariest thing in it, right? The thing is, for me, I just want it to have like an extra half an hour on it. I just when it got to the end, I was like, oh, I was just waiting for more. Like I felt like it fell a little bit short. I felt like they could have added at least an extra half an hour onto it, and it would have benefited. Incredibly atmospheric, super cool film. I really enjoy it. I just don't think it's massively scary, and I felt like they only touched the surface of what they could have done for this film, and that's why I've probably put it a bit lower than a lot of people might. So I'm not sure. Let me know what you think about that one. Okay, now we're moving on to 28 years later. I haven't got 28 weeks or days later even in this list. I've gone for 28 years later, right? And maybe I'll make another video that includes a lot more, another 50 horror films which I haven't shown in this video. But 28 years later, it's going in E for me as well, right? The reason for it, I really liked it. I really liked at least the first half of the film, right? Maybe the first two-thirds of the film. I thought the cinematography was really nice. The sound design was super nice. I, I was highly anticipating this film, being a huge fan of the previous two. I just think the ending ruined it. I thought the ending was like weird. I didn't like that there was like a gang of Gary Glitter cosplayers like jumping in doing like 80s martial arts at the end. I was just like I just want to like call me boring. I just feel like it would have been I'd consider it far higher, highly rated. had it had like a more straightforward ending. I feel like a lot of films do this where they're a little bit pretentious and they tried to do too much, think they're too clever, and I just think they kind of lost the plot towards the end for me. And yeah, that's why it's kind of not very highly rated on this list. I still enjoyed it. I actually only seen this once, so I'll have to watch it a couple of more times to maybe cement that opinion. Maybe I'll prefer it on another watch. Let me know what you think. I'm sure a lot more people have seen this one with it being a newer film. Okay, so what have we got next? So the Babadook, F tier, right? My reason for this being in F tier, right? The kid I found to be like incredibly annoying, and I thought it was too similar to certain other films I've seen before, like maybe The Conjuring. It kind of reminded me of like a worse version of that, or like other haunted house style films. It's very scary. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh with this one. Personally, for me, I just don't find it to be very watchable, and it wouldn't be one of the first ones that I'd recommend. As someone who was either getting into the horror film genre of films, or a fan that just hadn't seen it, it wouldn't be high up on the list. But with it being so scary, I think maybe that is again a controversial one. Let me know. Okay, moving on, we've got 10 Cloverfield Lane, right? D tier for me. So, very interesting concept for a film, and I can't talk too much about the story without spoiling anything. One of the things that I really liked about this film was very unique, and it kept me guessing like the entire film. I was constantly wondering what was happening, what kind of the end goal was, whether things were real or not real. I thought there was a lot of really good suspense in this, and yeah, for that reason, it's D tier. I just wouldn't have it much higher because I don't think it's quite scary enough, and I don't think the quality of certain aspects of it is, you know, would justify it getting any higher in this ranking list. Moving on, we've got Bird Box. So, F tier for me. This is one which I don't know if it was the marketing. I feel like it had a huge marketing budget. I feel like the normies loved it, similarly to Get Out. And I'm not trying to be pretentious here. I just feel like for me, it was just very meh. Like it didn't do much for me. It's quite forgettable, honestly. And I wanted to have it in this list because I know it's incredibly popular and highly rated. I just don't think it's that scary. I think it's a bit dull. I think it is a unique concept though, and it's still a good film, and that's why it's on this list to begin with. Let me know what you think. Okay, what have we got next? We got Wolf Creek. Okay, B tier for me. Now, I'm not sure if even myself I'm rating that too highly. Again, I love films, early 2000 horror films. I love films where people are being chased by like an absolute creep, and yeah, it's super like gory, tense. There's a lot of fear factor in it. I really like the intro with with the people and the encounter at the start. I haven't actually seen Wolf Creek 1 or Wolf Creek 3 because I can't find them anywhere. I don't know if they're available in the UK. Have tried to find them on DVD. I don't know what's going on with that. If anyone knows where I can watch 1 and 3, let me know. Hopefully they're as good as I think Wolf Creek 2 is. I actually really like this film. Like I said, the setting's cool. I don't think I've seen another Australian film, let alone another Australian horror film. So, again, if anyone's got there are any Aussies in the comment section, and you've got any other recommendations for horror films, I'd love to see some more Australian ones for sure. I thought it was great. I thought it was really tense, and I love films in general, and especially horror films, which make me think, what would I do in this situation? How would I handle that? Oh my god, I'd be so scared. And for those reasons, B tier for me all day. Next on the list, we've got Your Next. So for me, this would be in the D tier, right? This actually took me by surprise. I think I found this on a film review website. I'm not sure which it was. I thought this was a really nice surprise. I thought this was going to be another one of those like throwaway horror films, which I didn't really think too highly of. Maybe it didn't have a huge marketing budget. It kind of flew under the radar for me. I only saw it, I think, late last year. I thought it had a really nice soundtrack, super unique soundtrack. I thought it had a pretty cool story, and a lot of like twists and turns in it along the way. I'd be surprised if a lot of people had seen that film, to be honest. I just don't think it was maybe unique enough or like strong enough in certain aspects, like acting or horror or fear or even writing, to justify it being higher on the list. Like, I wouldn't call it a classic. I just think it's a nice horror film to watch, if you're running out of things that you haven't seen already, which is always the case for me. I'm always looking for new stuff that I haven't seen. Okay, next on the list, we've got Smile, right? So I would put this in C tier. Now, the reason Smile is in C tier for me, I I'm not sure it's a modern day classic necessarily. I think this is really scary, and I don't know if people would necessarily agree with me. I think Smile is very scary. It's very subtle, and I don't know, it just makes me feel like unnerved when I watch it. And the premise of like I don't know, losing control, and yeah, I don't know. I just find it really, really unnerving, scary. And again, when I put myself in the shoes of the characters in this film, like it's definitely up there in terms of horror films for me. I think a lot of people probably have seen that, as it is a newer one on the list. Okay, so moving on. Wrong Turn. Now, Wrong Turn 1, I'm specifically talking about here. This is B tier, 100%. Now, definitely a modern day classic, right? It came out like maybe like 20 years ago or something. I think Wrong Turn is just a really enjoyable type of film to watch. Again, early 2000s, a group of like, younger people getting chased in the woods by a bunch of creeps. Not massively scary, not incredible acting, not incredible writing. I understand, this type of genre is my guilty pleasure. Um, but it is very popular and a lot of people like it, even though it's not highly rated. And they've absolutely milked the series. And that's why I'm specifically talking about one only. I think there's like seven of them all together now. And I just think if you like these kind of trashy horror films, that has to be high on the list for me, personally. Moving on to the next one on the list, we've got Sleepy Hollow. Now, I'm not sure if a lot of people have seen this. It's got Johnny Depp in it, and yeah, it came out a little while ago. I would personally put this in the D tier, right? I think it's a very interesting concept for a film, like a haunted, like little village haunted by like a headless horse rider. Um, it's not like a classic horror film necessarily. Like, it's not terrifying, but I think it's a solid film, unique, very atmospheric. If you enjoy interesting stories that are like set in like like periodically or period times, I think it's well worth the watch. This one, I don't know. Maybe it's a bit high on the list, to be honest. I like it personally, and again, it's one that I saw when I was younger, and I think for that reason, I probably enjoy it more than a lot of other people. Moving on to the next one, Hellraiser. So I know there's a few Hellraiser films. This is the 2022 one in particular. I thought the cinematography was quite nice. I thought I liked a lot. The special effects were nice. I liked a lot of things about it. Right. I just think it was a bit forgettable. Like, I've seen it once, and I can barely really remember like, you know, what happened, or like it wasn't even that long ago. It was like last year, and yeah, I just don't think it's that strong in terms of writing or story. But I do enjoy the special effects, and I enjoy the cinematography, and yeah, again, I just don't think it's that scary. So that's why it's F tier for me personally. Um, Next one on the list, we've got Mandy here, right? So Mandy for me, C tier. So Again, I think this is kind of like crossing the boundaries of genres. To be honest, it's not a straight horror film. It's maybe a bit hard for a lot of people to watch. The opening third, at least, is incredibly slow. And unless you're in like the right mood for something like that, or you enjoy those types of films, you probably have a hard time with it, to be honest. However, Nicolas Cage is awesome in it. I really like his films in general. The cinematography is absolutely awesome. Like some of the best cinematography I've ever seen in any film, regardless of horror genre. The soundtrack is amazing, and it's very unique, very interesting, and once you get past that slow first third of the film, I think it's absolutely awesome. Highly recommend people to watch that if you haven't already seen it. Definitely really good, and that's why it's C tier for me. Next up on the list, we've got a film called Alone. So this film, A tier for me. Alone is A tier. Very simple. It's basically like a woman driving through like a foresty area in America, maybe like Denver, maybe like Washington State. I don't know. I'm from the UK. I have no idea where it's meant to be, but it's very simple, and I just really enjoy the tension in this film. Like again, it's one that flies under the radar. It's not got massively highly rated or high ratings. I just personally really enjoy the tension of this film. It's about a woman dealing with a stalker who's driving alone through this rural area, and it shows her struggle and how she has to deal with this challenging situation. And yeah, I don't mind films with a simple concept. Honestly, I think it's very well made, and even though it's not gory necessarily or like necessarily terrifying, I think the suspense alone is enough to take it to A tier. So for me, it is right up there personally. Hostel. Now, I did give this a B tier retroactively, or like I do think this could maybe have been slightly higher, potentially in the A tier. I think it's a great film. Especially the setting is really cool, right? A group of younger people going to a hostel in like Central Europe. I think it's set in like Slovakia or somewhere like that, maybe. I think it's really cool. I think it's a great film, and I think at the time it came out as well, it was really unique. Still is quite unique, to be honest. I can't think of many other films which replicated it as well. I think it's a great film. It's got a lot of gore. It's got a lot of suspense. It's got really good writing and a really interesting story. And yeah, and I don't know. And if it is got any ties to like real life in any way, it makes it even more terrifying than just it being a standalone film. I really like Hostel. I think that's going to be very popular with other horror film fans as well. But moving on to Incantation. Now, again, I think this is one that's flew under the radar. Personally, gotta be S tier for me. Incantation is one of the scariest films I've ever seen. I'd say it's right up there with films like The Fourth Kind. I think Incantation is truly terrifying. Just like a couple of others on the list, it is a little bit of a slow start. It's got a bit of a build up to like the second half where it really gets going. I think it's excellent. I think it's very unique. It is a film. It's an Asian film. I'm not sure which part of Asia, so there will be subtitles if you haven't seen it. Hopefully that won't be a blocker for anybody though. I love the ending of this film. I'm not gonna say what the ending is, but the ending will the ending again will be something that sticks in your memory. And then a couple of days later, if you're taking the bins out in the evening, if you're taking your dog for a walk in the evening, you know, just going to sleep at night, like you will be thinking about Incantation, and especially like the way it ends as well. I was very impressed with this film, and I think it's a Netflix original as well, if I'm not mistaken. And as a film that I'd never heard of at the time when I've seen it, I was so impressed by it. And if you haven't seen that, definitely worth a watch. Check it out. Moving on then, what have we got next? We got the Blair Witch Project, right? So for me, B tier. Um, Similar to Paranormal Activity, I don't think it's like massively rewatchable if you watched it once. I think it's, you know, I think it's pretty slow. Not massive amounts of things happen. I just think again it set the tone and the foundation for a lot of similar films to be made in a similar vein afterwards. An iconic film and a modern day classic as well. So I'm sure people are already aware of that film. If you haven't already seen it, check it out. Next on the list, we've got Scream. Now, Scream, I'd put in D tier, right? Now, the reason I put Scream in D tier, similarly to films like Wrong Turn or Final Destination, they absolutely milked the series, and I feel like that the fact there's like six other films of those types of films almost takes away from the original in my eyes, because they have absolutely milked the genre and just basically remade the same film half a dozen times. It's a classic, a modern day classic. I think it probably is inspired a lot by the likes of Halloween and certain other films, maybe the Jason films. I'm sure people have already heard about it and enjoy it. I just don't think like the acting, the writing, the story is deep enough to warrant it being any higher on this list. Even though I do really think it's a good film to watch. Moving on then, what we got next? We got Cabin in the Woods. So for me, I would say this is D tier, right? Now, the reason being is it's almost a parody film, right? It's not a straight up horror film. And I don't think it's, even though it's a great film, very highly rated, really cool film as well, very enjoyable. I think if you was recommending horror films to people, this would be one of the last ones, but not for the reasons you might think. Not because it's a bad film or anything, just because there's a lot of references to other horror films. And I feel like you would benefit from watching Cabin in the Woods if you're already like a seasoned horror film enjoyer. So yeah, the fact it isn't like a straight up horror film, it's a bit more of a like a parody almost. That's why it's slightly lower on the list, but great film nonetheless. Next up, we have Escape Room. So for me, this is E tier, right? Really cool concept. Don't know if anyone's ever been to an escape room before. I haven't personally, but I really like the idea. It's just like a group of people set in one of those like escape rooms that you can go to with your friends, and it's basically a deadly version of that. It's really cool concept for a film and very unique. I just don't think it's scary. It's more of like an interesting watch. And, it's not going to win any awards necessarily, never high up on these rating lists. But as far as horror films go, if you're just looking to put something on, before you go to sleep, it's definitely worth a watch. It's just nothing special in my opinion. Next on the list, we've got Barbarian, right? I think this is a really cool film, pretty new as well. I think it only came out a few years ago now. Again, super unique, interesting concepts. Got some pretty stylistically, it's quite nice. It's got a lot of like thought-provoking things in it. I just don't think it's massively special, memorable, or like scary enough to warrant it being much higher on this list. Now, up next, we've got Weapons, right? And Weapons, for me, now, people are not going to agree with this, I'm sure, but F tier. Weapons is F tier, in my opinion. Now, keep in mind, to be totally transparent, the first and only time I actually saw Weapons was in a cinema in Amsterdam after a long day. So, perhaps I'm not giving it a fair shot here, and maybe it's worth me rewatching this to solidify my opinion on what I think of it. Generally speaking, I just think thought it was a bit slow. Didn't think it was very scary. I just didn't really highly rate it, to be honest. And honestly, when I saw the reviews come out and I saw that it was so highly rated, I was honestly shocked because, yeah, I mean, some of the classic ones which are highly rated on the list, such as like Alien, in the C category here, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Exorcist. I completely get like that the classics, they're just kind of old and maybe a bit dated now. Weapons, I just don't get why it was so highly rated, honestly. Let me know if you a fan of that film, why you enjoyed it, and maybe try and enlighten me on it, and maybe I'll have to give it a rewatch soon. Okay, moving on. Coming to the end now. We have Final Destination, and for me, that's D tier. And I see Final Destination in the exact same light that I see Scream, slightly lower than Wrong Terms in terms of these Wrong Turn in terms of these milk genres. Like a classic film, very popular. I just don't think it's that scary at all. Very interesting, unique concept for a film, though, and it is a modern day classic, so that's why it's not lower on the list. It's just not scary for me, and it's the acting and the writing and the story is a bit meh. So that's why I can't be much higher, to be honest. Okay, moving along. We got Us, right? So I liked Us. I thought it was really creepy. I thought there was a lot of suspense in this film. I thought it was really interesting. It took me by surprise because I never heard anyone talking about it by the time I watched it. I just don't think it was like massively that memorable or special or even it was creepy, right? And there was a lot of suspense. I just don't think it was like terrifying to, or especially in the sense of like when I watched it for the first time. I just don't think it can have it much higher on this list, to be honest. Okay, moving on then. So we've got A Quiet Place. Now, for me, I often get this one mixed up with Bird Box, even though they're not that similar. I just think A Quiet Place was a film that the normies seem to enjoy, critics seem to enjoy. Maybe a lot of casual horror fans really liked this film. For me, I just wasn't massively impressed. I didn't really find it scary. I just, yeah, I didn't really find it that scary. I found it to be a bit dull personally, and maybe I'm just ignorant to the types of things that make good films. But I just don't think it was as special as people were making out, to be honest. And it's another one of those types of films where when I saw the ratings for it, I was very surprised, honestly. But I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me in the comment section. Just let me know. I'm open to having my mind changed and rewatching these things. It's not an issue. Okay, so final two then. What have we got? Apostle. Now, Apostle, B tier. Now, again, I think this might be a Netflix original. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. This is a really cool film. I really liked this film. It's a newer film, and I loved the setting of it. A man going to like a remote island. It's like a period drama as well. Very cool atmospheric setting, very creepy story, lots of tension and suspense. Nothing massively terrifying, but I find that when I'm watching it, I'm always really concerned for the actual main characters, and it's very engaging and enjoyable to watch as well. And that is definitely one on the list which I can rewatch multiple times and still enjoy. Honestly, it might have been rated higher, like in the A tier, if it had more of a simplified ending. For me, it's got a similar problem to 28 Years Later, where it's excellent, but I feel like they overcomplicate the ending slightly, and because of that, it's not higher on the list. But if you haven't seen that, I would really recommend it. I really like that film. Okay, moving on. The last film on the list, we've got a film called Traffic, right? And I would also put this in B tier. Now, I'm not sure if it's a Netflix original, but I saw it last year on Netflix. I was blown away in terms of what I expected going in and what I took from it afterwards. I really did not expect much from this film, but I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was very realistic and believable. It had some great twists and turns near the ending, near the ending of the film, and I thought it was really cool. I thought the story was really good. I thought it was very believable. I thought it had some really tense and suspenseful scenes. It's one of those incredibly engaging films. I thought some of the characters were really interesting, and for that reason, it's definitely high up on my list. Now, that brings me to the end of the list. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you watching the video. I can definitely do another video like this on the top horror films that I've seen, because I know I'm missing a lot of good ones. I'm missing a lot of other films that are connected to series. For example, I could touch on like 28 Days or Weeks Later even, and there's a lot more to talk about, right? So if you'd like me to do another one of these films, please let me know in the comment section. I did enjoy making this video. I did put a lot of thought into it about the types of films it would include. Before I got this list and compiled it, I did quite a bit of research on Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, IMDb, Letterboxd, and honestly, I was very disappointed with their top 10 horror films. I might flash it on the screen at the end of this at the end of this video. I just thought their list were dead, honestly. I thought, like, Metacritic, I think they had one film past it, that was in the 2000s. They had films from like the 30s and the 60s and the 70s and the 50s. And I'm like, it's 2026. Like, I find myself looking for horror films all the time, and I respect these rating websites. But when I go on them, all it's showing me is all of these old films that I've got absolutely no interest in watching. And listen, I'm not trying to disrespect classic films. I understand why they're highly rated and very well made, and they were good at the time of release. I just wouldn't say. I just think the list needs to be revised. Personally, I don't know who's making them, but the way I thought of this list is, what would I recommend to someone who is getting into the horror genre, or is maybe a big fan of the horror genre already and is looking for some new stuff to watch. And personally, I'm not going to be making recommendations, to watch like Frankenstein or Psycho from like, I think Frankenstein came out nearly 100 years ago, and that was on Metacritic's top 10. So anyway, if you have similar problems like me, let me know. Or if there's any better websites I can check out to find new stuff, I'd be really interested in that as well. Because I'm running dry, honestly. I've seen too many. Um, yeah, and without saying anything else, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I know it's a long video. Yeah, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.